The federal government is releasing 762 million litres of petrol and diesel from Australia's domestic reserves in an effort to address supply issues stemming from the war in the Middle East. That represents up to 20% of the minimum stockholding obligation for petrol and diesel. Speaking to the media this morning, Energy Minister Chris Bowen took steps to assure the public.
Fuel continues to arrive in Australia as predicted and on schedule. The government and the industry, though, are of course very alive to the fact that the ongoing situation in the Middle East does provide ongoing risks to the supply of fuel around the world.
It comes as Iran's supreme leader has vowed, via a statement read out on Iranian state TV, to keep blocking the Strait of Hormuz. It was Mojtaba Khamenei's first official comment on the war since his succession.
Certainly, the leverage of blocking the Strait of Hormuz must continue to be used, and opening other fronts where the enemy is highly vulnerable, if the war continues, will be considered, while observing strategic interests. I assure everyone that we will not refrain from avenging the blood of your martyrs. The revenge we intend is not limited to the martyrdom of the great leader of the revolution alone, rather, any member of the nation who is martyred by the enemy.
For more on the impact the conflict is having on Australia's fuel supplies and what the federal government is doing to address it, here's political reporter Romy Stevens, who joins us from Parliament House. Hi there, Romy. So what is the government's plan here?
Hi, Roz. So yesterday we heard the news that the International Energy Agency had approved the release of 400 million barrels of oil from its 32 member countries in a bid to try and prevent further oil price hikes amid this ongoing unrest in the Middle East. Now, Australia is one of those member countries and has been considering its response. Today, the Federal Energy Minister Chris Bowen has announced that up to more than 760 million litres of fuel and diesel will be released from Australia's domestic reserves, and he says that that will contribute to the IEA's collective efforts here and is the equivalent of up to 5 million barrels. But the Energy Minister also says that this will help relieve the pressure that is currently on distribution chains here in Australia, and that companies releasing this fuel will need to prioritise regional communities that are currently facing shortages. Now, the federal government has repeatedly said this week that those regional communities and farmers who have been unable to access fuel, that's come as a result of panic buying and a sharp increase in demand rather than an issue with supply. Chris Bowen has regularly said that our supply is sufficient and that ships do continue to arrive and bring fuel here to Australia, but he's been facing questions all week about whether or not Australia is going to run out of fuel if this crisis in the Middle East continues. He was asked that again today. Let's take a listen to his response.
Fuel supply is currently secure. It's arriving on schedule. Will there be further threats to fuel supply as the international circumstance, if the international circumstance continues to worsen? Of course. That is a realistic thing which governments should prepare for and are prepared for, the Australian people are prepared for. But I think the sort of, inflammatory running out language, we are nowhere near that.
The opposition, Romy, has been critical of the government's handling of fuel shortages in regional areas. How's the Shadow Energy Minister responded to today's announcement?
Yes, that's right. The opposition has been applying pressure here all week, particularly given those reports that we're hearing of farmers unable to access diesel and therefore not able to operate their machinery, particularly as they head into the cropping season. Now, as mentioned earlier, Chris Bowen has repeatedly said that this is a problem of increase in demand rather than supply, but that's been criticised by the opposition. The Shadow Energy Minister Dan Tehan responded to this latest announcement from the federal government, and it is among a series of announcements that have been made by the government this week. We've also heard them say that they're going to lower the fuels quality standards in a bid to get funnel more fuel into Australia's domestic market. The Shadow Energy Minister Dan Tehan has been very critical of Chris Bowen here, saying that he doesn't have a plan to ensure Australia's fuel supply. Here's what he had to say.
Well, the Australian people need more. They need a plan. They need to be reassured that there are no problems, and especially in regional and rural Australia, they need to know when will the fuel arrive.
Dan Tehan says that this could not only have a detrimental impact on fuel prices in Australia, but also potentially on grocery prices, given that farmers are looking to start their cropping season and aren't able to operate their machinery at the moment. We've also heard reports that some fishermen aren't able to get their boats out on the water, so serious concerns around food production in the country and the flow-on effects that that could have at the supermarket as well.